Right, I started part 2 of Anna Karenina today, so let's go through what I read. Chapter 1, Kitty's not well. So she's been rejected by Vronsky. She herself has rejected Lieven's proposal, and they've got the doctors in, because she's heartbroken. So you get the doctor in for heartbreak, don't you? So there's a family doctor and there's a famous doctor. And the famous doctor seems a little bit arrogant. So we've got here, the first quotation I've copied out is that the doctor considers a maidenly shamefacedness was merely a remnant of barbarism. I mean, what? That's from the Rosamund Bartlett translation. From the Pevear and Volokhonsky, they've got maidenly modesty was merely a relic of barbarism. I think maidenly modesty seems to fit a little better there. Shamefacedness, yes, it's a word, but modesty's a bit better. So there's a famous doctor and there's a family doctor. The prince, Kitty's dad, doesn't care much for doctors, nor they him. He's pretty clear what's going on with Kitty, and he doesn't think it's something that the doctors should be involved in. But the princess, the mother, she's in charge. So the doctors are in, and the prince is just like, ah. So the examination happens, and the doctor says, yeah, they should go abroad, but they should report to him. And I don't even know why he says that, really. It's just what they did, I suppose, in those days. So, chapter 2, Dolly comes round to see how things are. Dolly, of course, being Kitty's sister. Things between Dolly and Stiva are bad again. So you recall that Stiva was unfaithful to her and then was reconciled by Anna. And now they're at odds again. But it says here that the first cut of jealousy, of infidelity, is the deepest. So now she's not as bothered. Because the first time was harsh. Now she's used to it, so she's just agreed to put up with it, I suppose. And they've had another baby. A baby daughter. So it says the prince knows what's wrong with Kitty, and he knows, and finds it embarrassing. The princess didn't know of Lieven's proposal. Dolly tells her about that. She despairs at her part in Kitty's malaise. Reminds me a bit of Emma, which I've written here. Jane Austen's Emma, of course, where the mother here is matchmaking. She wants to match her daughter with Vronsky, where her daughter is actually in love with Lieven. So the mother's getting involved in a negative way. Chapter 3, Dolly talks to Kitty. She says he's not worth you suffering over him, meaning Vronsky. Dolly asks Kitty if she spoke to Lieven, so nobody but Kitty and Lieven knows of his proposal and rejection. Kitty says she'd never do what Dolly did in taking back her unfaithful husband. So Kitty gets a bit angry at Dolly here, and she says this in the heat of the moment. You know, she's angry about the situation, so she says, yeah, your husband, he's unfaithful to you. Why are you taking him back? That's out of order. Then we get this little quotation here. It was as if the tears were the essential lubricant without which the machinery of mutual relations between the two sisters could not operate effectively. So that's when they both burst into tears and there's reconciliation. They don't fall out. So I just like that quotation. Dolly understands why Kitty's so unhappy. And she says, it's as if everything that was good in me has been hidden away and only the most horrible things have remained, says Kitty. So we leave their house, we go back to Anna, and we learn of Anna's 3 circles. So the first one is her husband's work colleagues. And at first she deferred to them, she revered them, and as she got to know them, she's come to know them as just ordinary humans. So that's that group. There's the second group, which is referred to as the conscience of Petersburg society. So this is Lydia Ivanovna, who's the kind of social, what would you call her? She's like Anna Pavlovna from War and Peace. She's the one who knows all of the social circles and what's going on in St. Petersburg. But they're all on the older side. They're not involved in going out to balls and stuff with the young people. That's the third group, which is referred to as Le Beau Monde. Balls and theatre and parties. This is the group in which Vronsky is a member. Of which Vronsky is a member. And it includes Princess Betsy Tverskaya, who's Anna's cousin's wife. She seems to be the kind of leader of this little group. And yeah, so Anna, when she gets back to St. Petersburg at first, she's annoyed that Vronsky followed her. But every time he is in her company or she's in his company, she lights up. And she realises that she actually seeks his company, even though she knows it's wrong. So we get this quotation. It says, every time she met him, her soul lit up with that same feeling of animation which had taken hold of her that day in the railway carriage when she saw him for the first time. So she finds it quite intoxicating. Then we get a bit about Vronsky and how he feels, and it seems not to be quite so evenly matched in terms of love. It talks of how Vronsky might appear ridiculous in the eyes of St. Petersburg society if he were chasing after a young, available woman. But now that he's wooing a married woman, that's an entirely different thing. So it's like a challenge for him. So I've asked the question here, is it a game to Vronsky? So that's where I've got to. It's up to the end of chapter 4, part 2. So we'll see you when we get to chapter 5 and on. Right, we're into chapter 5, part 2. Notes I've made here are the story of the colonel's wife and the drunken soldiers in Vronsky's regiment. It's all very laddish culture. We learn that Vronsky is an aide-de-camp. Did we know that before? Don't know. Chapter 6. Princess Myakaya, which means soft. So this is the third circle that we mentioned earlier. Le Beau Monde, which is Princess Betsy Tverskaya's circle of high society. So Princess Myakaya is one of them, which means soft in Russian, Myakaya. We get a little detail about Betsy's husband, that he's a passionate collector of engravings. I just thought that was a funny little detail. Princess Myakaya is talking about a dinner where she was served 1,000 ruble sauce, and she didn't like it. It was green and not very nice. And she says that she can make sauces much cheaper and they're much nicer as well. They discuss Anna's change since her return from Moscow. At this point, Anna's not there, but she's about to be. Chapter 7. Anna arrives. She comes into the drawing room, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. She's just come from Countess Lydia's, which is Circle 2, high society but older, into Circle 3, the young women, high society women. And we've got some quotations here. One from the ambassador's wife, where they're discussing passion. And she says, passion? Who talks of passion in this day and age? So Vronsky's response to that is, what's to be done? This quaint old fashion has not died out yet. And then a discussion ensues about passion and love. So let's flick forward to the next page in my notes. Yeah. There's a quotation from Anna where she says, "I think if there are as many heads as there are minds, then there must be as many kinds of love as there are hearts." That's a nice little quotation. In Russian it reads, "Я думаю, если сколько голов, столько умов, то и сколько сердец, столько родов любви." So that's something I want to start doing, is writing down the quotations in Russian as well, because my Russian's rusty and I want to get it back again and read those bits of the novel in Russian too, because I can. So it seems silly not to. She then goes on to say, "I often think men do not understand what's honourable and what's dishonourable." So talking there maybe about Vronsky. And then she says, "Love, the reason I don't like that word is because it means too much to me, far more than you can understand." So she says that to Vronsky. Wow. And there's a point in the chapter where Anna's husband appears and seems to ignore her very much. Goes and sits down with his pals, ignores her. She's sitting down talking to Vronsky, and he doesn't seem bothered by it. He seems very inattentive. So, yeah, that's to his detriment, I think. Is he taking Anna for granted? Or is he just trusting her? Which is no bad thing. Trust is important. But, you know, Anna's often a whirlwind of passion. So that's us up to chapter 8. Yeah, chapter 8. It's quite a paragraph, by the way. I mentioned at the end of 7 about the idea of Anna Karenina's husband trusting her. And I mentioned the fact that he's been inattentive towards her at the soiree. And we get into chapter 8, and it starts off by saying that jealousy, according to his conviction, was insulting to a wife, and it was necessary to trust one's wife. So yeah, there is that idea of trust, which is vital in a relationship. However, being inattentive is also a problem. But then we get a description of Alexei Alexandrovich's character a little bit, and how strange it is for him to be start to feel this feeling of jealousy because he's never... Cats at the window. Right, you'll have to put up with some meowing, I'm afraid. So, yeah, it's a strange concept for him, this idea of jealousy, and it says that his conviction that jealousy was a despicable feeling and that one should have trust had not been destroyed. He felt he was standing face to face with something illogical and nonsensical, and he did not know what he should do. He was standing face to face with life, with the possibility of his wife loving someone other than himself, and this seemed to him very nonsensical and incomprehensible because it was life itself. And then it gives a metaphor of a bridge over an abyss, where he's standing on a bridge over a precipice and suddenly discovers that this bridge has been taken down, revealing an abyss. This abyss was life itself, while the bridge was the artificial life Alexei Alexandrovich had been leading. For the first time, conjectures occurred to him about the possibility of his wife falling in love with somebody, and he was horrified by the idea. So yeah, it's like there are cracks that have been wallpapered over, to use another metaphor, in the relationship, and while there's never been another object for Anna to fall in love with, it's been fine. They just carry on with their lives as they are. But as soon as another object does appear, then the cracks reveal themselves, the abyss. So yeah, it's fascinating. So yeah, let's read more of the chapter. Right, chapters 9 to 12. So we spoke about the bridge over the abyss that Alexei Alexandrovich experiences when it comes to his life. The abyss is his life, and the bridge is the facade, the thing that makes him think everything's alright, and it isn't. And it's fascinating to me. So we carry on with that, and it says that Alexei Alexandrovich had spent his entire life living and working in official spheres, which had to do with the reflections of his life. And every time he had bumped into life itself, he had shied away from it. So he's got some avoidance techniques going on, which gives me the impression that he knows not everything is not well with his marriage. Could be wrong. And then, yeah, he decides he's going to have a word with Anna to put her straight. And she comes home. So he goes through this inner turmoil about what he's going to say to her. He goes through in his head the dialogue that he's going to say. And there's a bit later where it says that unbeknown to him, none of what he'd rehearsed actually is what comes out. You know, that's something I can relate to. But she comes in and he says, I want to have a word with you. And she's like, what? What's wrong? And then it says that she was surprised at her capacity for lying. So she knows what she's doing here. She felt she was clad in the impenetrable armour of falsehood. So he says to her, Anna, I must caution you. She's like, what? Me? About what? So he says to her, you know, it's been noted, people have seen that you're behaving in a way that's not in keeping with a lady, you know. And she kids on everything's alright, and then he says he saw that the recesses of her soul, which had been open to him before, were now closed to him. So there's a change here in their relationship. And that's what you feel in this chapter, that this is a turning point for their relationship. So she responds saying, what? I don't understand what you're talking about. And then it said she was astounded at the calm and natural tone in which she was speaking and the selection of words she used. And then she goes on to say, after he says to her, I love you and I'm doing this because I love you, she says, love? Is he capable of love? If he hadn't heard that there was such a thing as love, he would never have used this word. He doesn't even know what love is. So she feels that her husband doesn't know what this feeling is that she's now experiencing for Vronsky. This is the passion that's mentioned earlier. They don't have that in their marriage. I mean, you know what it's like. If you've been in love before, it's overwhelming, it's inspiring, it's all-encompassing. And then that fades, that doesn't last. And then you stick to your commitments. That's what you do. And that's what she's not doing, and that's what he's asking her to do, to honour their commitment, to honour their marriage. And she claims that he doesn't know what love is. Now, we don't know what their history is, what their feelings were for one another when they first got together. That's not made clear. Maybe it is later. We'll see. So then we go into chapter 10, which is very short, and it says that from that evening a new life began for Alexei Alexandrovich and for his wife. So it's all changed. It's a very short chapter, it's not even a full page. Then we go into 11, which changes the narrative a little bit. And it's Anna with Vronsky. And Anna is feeling shameful. So, and we don't know how much time has passed here, or where they are, or anything like that. Vronsky says, Anna, Anna, in a trembling voice, I beg you. But the louder he spoke, the lower she bowed her once proud, lively head in shame, and she crumpled up and started to slip off the sofa. My God, forgive me, she said, sobbing, pressing her hands to her breast. So it's not quite clear what's going on here. And then there's a weird comparison between their love and a murder. It says that body he had robbed of life was their love, their first period of their love. Shame at her spiritual nakedness oppressed her and communicated itself to him. But in spite of the murderer's deep horror before the body of his victim, the body must be hacked to pieces and hidden, and the murderer must take advantage of what he has gained by the murder. I can never forget that which is my whole life for a minute of this happiness. What happiness, she said with loathing and horror, and the horror was ineluctably transmitted to him. I beg you, not a word more. So this is strange, this bit. This is the last chapter in the read-along I'm doing with Henry Eliot. So I knew putting that post-it in the front was worthwhile. So this would have been published in the Russian Messenger, and this would have been the last chapter until the next issue comes out. And it finishes on this. So she dreams that both men are her husbands. And it's not a good dream. It said that, but this dream weighed on her like a nightmare, and she always awoke from it in horror. So that's us at chapter 12, and that's where that particular sequence would be finished in the Russian Messenger. But I'm going to crack on because I'm going to put this out as a part 2, so let's see what happens. Right, so between chapters 10 and 11 in the book, there are dots, right? That's the Russian. I didn't know what they meant. They're in the translation as well. And in my notes I've written, there's a change here. Anna and Vronsky are together and she's ashamed. Have they just shagged? So I was watching Henry Eliot's summary of this section, and he confirms, yeah. So I called it. That's what's going on here, and Tolstoy has shown that with these dots. And then we jump into the next scene where there's a real change in the dynamic between the two, Vronsky and Anna. And Anna's feeling shame. And you're like, why is she feeling shame? Oh, the dots. Sitting outside, sunny Sunday morning, reading some of Levin's farming scenes from part 2. So we're at chapter 12 and 13, which I've just read, where we're getting Levin going through some of the sowing and chatting with the peasants and with the steward. And it's just some of the most exquisite writing. And to be reading it about the coming of spring, sitting out here on the 9th of March in the sun with the bird song, you just can't beat it. So there's a really beautiful description of the coming of spring here on page 155. It says, spring was a long time coming. During the last weeks of Lent, The weather was clear and frosty. In the daytime everything thawed in the sun, but at night it went down to -9. The snow was frozen so hard that carts were able to travel off-road. Easter was snowbound. Then all of a sudden, on Easter Monday, a warm wind began to blow. The clouds gathered, and warm heavy rain poured down for 3 days and 3 nights. On the Thursday the wind dropped, and a thick grey fog descended as if to hide the mysteries of the changes being wrought in nature. Inside the fog, waters began to flow, blocks of ice cracked and moved, turbid and foaming torrents started flowing faster, and then, right on Thomas Sunday, in the evening, the fog lifted. The clouds dispersed into fleecy wisps, the sky cleared, and real spring arrived. The following morning, a bright sun rose and quickly devoured the thin layer of ice coating the waters, and everywhere the warm air shimmered as if it was suffused with the steam rising from the warm earth. The old grass and the emerging needles of young grass turned green, buds swelled on the guelder rose, and on currant bushes and birch trees sticky with sap, and bees on the first spring flight from their new home started buzzing about the gold-flecked willows. Invisible larks burst into song, and the velvety green shoots and the ice-covered stubble. Peewits sent up plaintive calls over wetlands and marshes still sodden with murky, stagnant water. And up on high, cranes and geese flew past with their spring cackle. The cattle still showed patches of their winter coats, started lowing in the pastures. Lambs started frisking on their crooked legs round their bleating mothers, who were shedding their fleeces. Fleet-footed children started running along paths that were beginning to dry, leaving behind prints of their bare feet. Women washing linen at the pond started chattering merrily, and axes started falling in the yards, where peasants were repairing their ploughs and harrows. Real spring had arrived. It's just exquisite, isn't it? Right, we're at chapter 22, part 2, and Vronsky's just been to see his horse, Frou, and we get a scene here where he's just read his letter from his mother. He gets caught in a downpour, and he's feeling quite angry at his mother's interference in his love life, and his brother's as well. He's got a letter from his brother, and he talks about the infatuation with Anna, or rather he talks about his love for Anna and how it's not an infatuation, and he feels that it needs to end, but I'm not sure what he means. So he says he was angry with everyone for interfering. Precisely in his soul he felt that all of these people were right. He felt that the love which joined him to Anna was not a brief infatuation which would come to an end as society liaisons do, leaving no traces in the life of either party except pleasant or unpleasant memories. He felt all the wretchedness of his and her situation, all the difficulty of concealing their love, of lying and deceiving while being exposed to the gaze of the whole of society, and of lying, deceiving, scheming, and continually thinking of others, when the passion that united them was so intense that they both forgot about everything but their love. So, yeah, he goes on to say, it occurred to him clearly for the first time that it was vital to put an end to this lie, and the sooner the better. She and I should give everything up and hide away on our own somewhere with our love, he said to himself. So we get the feeling that Vronsky's the kind of man who normally indulges in liaisons which are just the result of passion and not love. But this time is different. And of course we know that Anna, there's a bit here about happiness where he's just read the letter and he says, no, they have to teach us how to live. They have no idea what happiness is, and they don't know that without this love there can be neither happiness nor unhappiness for us or life, he thought. So, yeah, Anna's in a predicament because she's married. and they're having to scheme and lie and be deceitful, and that's not the life that he wants. So yeah, just an interesting little insight into Vronsky's character here. After the scene with the horse, where he feels connected to his horse, and his horse is, what was the word they used? Spirited. And yeah, he's certainly spirited. And there's a scene where it says he wants to dance around, feeling the horse in him as a presence. It affects him. It affects his energy and his spirit. So cool. Right, just read chapter 22 in part 2. Great chapter. I had a big meeting last night, which I had to chair, and it's left me feeling tired. I need to recharge. But I've got this. It's sunny. It's warm enough to sit outside. I've got great literature, so what better way to recharge? You know what I mean? So in this chapter, Vronsky's going to see Anna. After the downpour, we get this nice little scene. Description of the scenery. The downpour did not last long, and by the time Vronsky drove up at a full trot, the shaft horse pulling the trace horses as they galloped through the mud without reins, the sun had come out again. The dacha roofs and the old lime trees in the gardens on both sides of the main street shone with a wet gleam, and water was dripping merrily from the branches and running down the roofs. This translation is just so well done, so well done. And then there's a scene here which I've written out in my notebook with a fountain pen, because that's how I like to roll. This is a Cross ATX, if you're interested in fountain pens. And it's about Anna's son, Seryoja, who Vronsky feels has been looking at him with hostility. And it says, the presence of this child aroused in both Vronsky and Anna a feeling akin to that experienced by a seafarer who sees from the compass that the direction he is swiftly heading in is far from the proper one, but is incapable of stopping the momentum, is with every minute carried off further and further off his course, and knows that to admit this to himself would be tantamount to admitting certain ruin. It's beautiful prose, isn't it? Beautiful. And then there's a big reveal in this chapter, so I mean, I'm assuming you've read it, otherwise what are you even doing here? But yeah, the big reveal, Anna's pregnant. Yeah, that's going to be a problem, isn't it? So she tells Vronsky, and she says that she detests her husband. What was the line? Let's have a look. Oh, not my husband, she said with a wry smile. I don't know. I don't think of him. He doesn't exist. So it's quite a chapter. Quite a chapter. Chapter 223. And Anna and Vronsky are having a chat after the downpour. Seryoja's sitting out the downpour in the conservatory, and they're having a chat about their futures, and Vronsky's saying, are you unhappy? We should run away together. And she says, you think I'm unhappy? I am like a hungry man who has been given something to eat. He might be cold and his clothes in tatters, and he might feel ashamed, but he's not unhappy. You think I'm unhappy? No, this is my happiness. So what's this saying? That her life, up until the point where she fell in love with Vronsky, had been like a hungry man, devoid of nourishment, and that with Vronsky's love she now feels nourished. No, and that's how I'm taking it. And she's thrown caution to the wind with her son, but there is a moment where she says to him, "Don't mention my son, don't talk of him." So, yeah, love for her son is as it should be. Her love for her husband is non-existent. When they discuss running away, she goes through a dialogue of what exactly she thinks her husband will say. So she knows him that well. And none of it's to do with love, it's all to do with honour and perception, how other people will think of it if she were to leave her husband. So it's kind of a loveless marriage, I think, is what we're getting here. And for love to blossom in this illegal place, yeah, a hungry man devoid of nourishment suddenly gets given something to eat. No, this is happiness. It's just me and Willow this morning. Say hi, Willow. So I'm through 24, 25, 26 and 27. We've got Vronsky at the races. And what stood out to me in that chapter, which is 24, is that we get a description of his love of beauty, and he's admiring Frou, his horse, and says he finds it hard to tear himself away from the spectacle just of admiring his horse's lines and beauty. And then we have the race where he's just about to win, and then he makes a mistake. He shifts his position on the horse. I'd forgotten about this scene actually, which bewilders me because it was pretty horrific. The horse breaks its back, or he breaks the horse's back, let's not make it passive, and then has to be put down. It's like, fuck, horrible. Yeah, and then he kicks it in the stomach at one point. So I've written here, do I feel sympathy for Vronsky? No, I might have done if he hadn't kicked the horse in the stomach. So he's trying to get it to get up, and it couldn't because his back was broken. It was another horrible scene. I wonder why Tolstoy put that in. Has he got any experience of that kind of thing himself, do you think? I wonder. I'm going to set this down here because it's uncomfy to hold. Right, so next up we've got Alexei Alexandrovich, Anna's husband. And I've got down here, why is he not fighting for his wife? Does he not love her? Did he ever love her? Because you get the feeling that he's all about business. He's all about appearances. But there's no love there. So that's kind of the impression we get. And then there's a bit here which I've quoted where it says, without being aware of it, Alexei Alexandrovich now sought opportunities to have a third person present during meetings with his wife. Is that so he's got a witness? Don't know. And then we get into 27 where we've got Anna at home. Alexei Alexandrovich comes home. She's all kind of la-di-da, you know. Hi, husband, how wonderful to see you. But it's false. And we get this chilling end to the chapter when he kisses her hand and she says she was aware of the spot on her hand which his lips had touched, and she shuddered in disgust. So yeah, it's not just that there's no love, it's that there's revulsion. So yeah, it's interesting reading about their relationship because it's kind of the polar opposite. She's, as I said earlier, devoid of love, like a hungry man, devoid of nourishment. So she's seeking it from Vronsky and she's getting it from Vronsky. And Vronsky admires beauty. So is it Anna's beauty that he loves? We'll see. Right, we're at chapter 30, part 2. This is an interesting chapter, we've got Kitty Scherbatska going off to the German spa town to heal her broken heart. And we're introduced to Madame Stahl, who's a high society Russian lady in a wheelchair, and she's been looked after by a young woman called Varyanka, known as Mademoiselle Varyanka. And we get really interesting paragraphs here from Kitty, who we're getting from her eyes a description of Varyanka. Thank you, Willow. She says that she could not have been attractive to men. She was like a beautiful flower which had already lost its bloom, despite having a full head of petals, and has no scent. Apart from that, she could not have been attractive to men because she also lacked what Kitty had in excess: a repressed spark of vitality and an awareness of her own attractiveness. So, this is from the narrator's point of view, saying that she doesn't have an awareness of her own attractiveness and that Kitty does. So they're kind of opposites in that regard. Is it talking about the vacuousness of regarding oneself as attractive? Not really. Then it goes on to talk about how Kitty finds herself drawn to this woman, saying that she's a model of what she was now painfully seeking: interests in life, virtues in life, beyond a girl's relations with men in society, which Kitty found odious, and which for her now resembled the shameful parading of goods awaiting purchasers. Good work, Rosamund Bartlett, translator. That's excellent translation. The longer Kitty observed her unknown friend, the more convinced she became that this girl was the perfect creature she had imagined her to be, and the more eager she was to make her acquaintance. And then we get a discussion here about what Kitty's eyes are saying and then what Varyanka's eyes are saying. It's a very clever little technique. The two girls encountered each other several times a day, and every time they met, Kitty's eyes would say, "Who are you? What are you? Are you really the lovely creature I imagine you to be?" But please don't think, her eyes would add, that I would take the liberty of thrusting myself upon you. I just admire you and like you. I like you too. You're very, very nice. And I would like you even more if I had the time, answered the eyes of the unknown girl. I just find that fascinating. So are we going to get more of Madame Stahl and Varyanka? I'm pretty sure we are. I think I'm getting to the place where I DNF'd the book back in 2019, 20? Can't remember when it was. Which is it's bewildering to me because I'm absolutely loving it right now. Then it goes on to introduce two other characters who appear at the German spa. Konstantin Levin's brother, Nikolai, and his fiancée or girlfriend, Maria Nikolaevna. And Kitty knows that that's who it is. He's described as having large, frightening eyes, which expressed a feeling of hatred and contempt. Right, part 2, chapters 31 and 32. We've got Kitty and Varyanka. We learn the story of Varyanka's relationship to Madame Stahl, that she's not her legitimate daughter, she's a foster daughter, replacement daughter. I don't really know how you would put it. But she's been raised as Madame Stahl's daughter. And they discuss broken hearts and relationships, and Varyanka says that she had a lover once and her lover's mother didn't agree to the union, so he went off and married someone else. And Kitty's like, how could you let that happen? You've been spurned. And she says, I've not been spurned. So Kitty goes on to ask Varianka some questions which are quite clearly about Kitty herself and about Vronsky's rejection of her and how it's her mother's match with Vronsky rather than Kitty's love with Levin. And Varianka says, well, I've got a secret. No, she asks Varianka, what's the secret to happiness? How can you deal with this? And she says, oh, I'll tell you. But then the Princess Sherbatskaya shouts Kitty in and says, it's cold outside, you better come in. So we don't get the secret. And it finishes the chapter. It's quite a nice little phrase. No, I always walk alone and nothing ever happens to me, she said, taking her hat. And after kissing Kitty once again, but still not saying what was important, she set off briskly with her music under her arm and vanished into the dusk of the summer night, taking away with her the secret of what was important and what gave her that enviable calmness and dignity. So I have a feeling we're going to get more about this relationship with Kitty and Varianka. It's quite intriguing. 233 and 34. So Kitty's enamoured with Varianka and she's starting to mimic the way she walks and the way she talks, and she's starting to feel religion. Interesting. It says, through Varianka she learned that one just had to forget oneself in order to become a calm, happy and worthy person. So that's what I got from 33. And 34, her father turns up, Kitty's father, Prince Sherbatsky. And he reacquaints himself with Madame Stahl, who apparently he knew back in the day when she took to her bed as an invalid. And he explains to her that she's faking, basically. She's got short legs and doesn't want to get up because she's vain. So she's been in bed and in a bath chair, which I presume is a wheelchair, for 10 years while Varianka looks after her. And it says that this affects how Kitty relates to her. It said that in no effort of the imagination could succeed now in bringing back the former Madame Stahl. So this is how Kitty's relating to her. So it's all done a U-turn, because up till then Kitty had doted on her in some way. Anyway, this quotation here I really enjoyed, which explains the difference between Prince and Princess Sherbatsky/Sherbatskaya. It says, the views of the prince and of the princess about life abroad were diametrically opposed. The princess thought everything was wonderful and, despite her secure position in Russian society, tried whenever she was abroad to be like a European lady, which she was not, because she was a Russian noblewoman, and therefore she had to pretend, which she found slightly awkward. The prince, on the other hand, thought everything abroad was ghastly, found European life tedious, kept to his Russian habits, and went out of his way whenever he was abroad to show he was less European than he was in reality. I just like that. You know what I mean? Okay, part 2, chapter 35. Varianka and Kitty, they have a wee bit of an altercation. Kitty gets passionate and she says to Varianka, I can only live by following my heart, but you live according to the rules. I just liked you, as simple as that, but you probably only liked me because you wanted to save me, to teach me. To which Varianka says, that's unfair, and it is unfair. So we get the story of how Petrov, the artist that Kitty was going to see as a way of helping him, the invalid, turns out he fancies her and he doesn't want to leave because Kitty's still there. So when Kitty's like, it's a pretense, you know, she's having a go at herself because was she faking it to make it? Was she pretending to help the guy just so that she could be seen as worthy in God's eyes? That's what she's thinking here. But I don't think that's true. I think it was a magnanimous gesture from the heart, because as she says later on, I can only live by following my heart. And I think that's what she was doing. So that's what I make of that. But they make up. She apologises and all is good. And then that's the end of that part of the book. We're on to book 3 after that. Come on, Willow, you're in my camera. So we get Kitty returning home to Russia cured. She was not as blithe or as high-spirited as before, but she was calm, and her Moscow sorrows became a memory. So she's cured of her broken heart, and we've had some new characters. I don't know if they'll be introduced. Not introduced, they've been introduced. I don't know if they'll be in it again, Varenka and Madame Stahl. It mentions Maria Yevgenyevna, and I had to look her up because I couldn't remember who it was. And it says it's Nikolai Levin's mistress, but she's also listed in the character list at the beginning as Maria Nikolaevna. So, what is her name? Answers on a postcard.